This is Energy Perspectives, a weekly podcast produced in Guyana that delves into the developments unfolding in the world's fastest growing economy. Here is our host, VEHSI, with this week's guest.
We're back with another episode of the Energy Perspectives Podcast, and today we're joined by Mr. Nicholas Deygoo-Boyer, a director on the Vreed-en-Hoop Shore Base project, and he's going to tell us all about that project today, but also over the past few years, he's been very proactive in the private sector, so we'd like to get some of his thoughts on private sector development in Guyana. Mr. Boyer, thank you for joining us today.
Well, I appreciate you having me here to, give some of my thoughts.
Sure. So let's talk about your project first. It's first of all, we're building an artificial island out there, and that on its own, it's impressive. Tell us about that. Right.
So when my partners and I got together and we acquired the lease in about 2020, one of the key things that drove us is that we looked at the marine infrastructure in Guyana, and we realized that the way the Demerara shipping channel runs, it comes in towards the mouth of the Demerara and then kind of takes a turn and then comes to align itself along the closer to the east bank. So what we realized is right at that turn, if you had a port that went out from the land to meet where that turn is, and you created like a channel towards that, you'd have a very efficient location for building a port. When we went to various companies who could build such a port, we met with Yandano, who are one of the largest civil and marine construction companies in the world, top 5. And they proposed to us, why don't you reclaim the land and create this artificial island? This is something they have done across the world. So when we looked at it and we said, this makes sense. Because you look at how shallow the area is out there because of the mud flats, it's doable. In fact, that area actually used to exist as land, but from the constant flows of the Demerara River, it would have eroded that area over time. We're talking about over hundreds, if not thousands, plus of years. So it was, from their experience, the most natural thing to do. From our experience, it's challenging our concepts of what you think about civil engineering and what's possible here. So it was very exciting from that. And it is that combination of our desire to build something that was efficient and their international experience of having done these sort of projects before that led to, conceptualization. And now you have actual tangible fruition of the project, because the island is essentially reclaimed. That is done. What is being worked on at this point is just the construction on top of the island to make it workable. And I think about last week, we received our first commercial vessel. It was delivering cargo for us, but it was the first commercial vessel that did not belong to one of the, let's say, members of the project or contractors. So it was a big milestone for us.
Right. A massive undertaking, no doubt. What is that area, that island, meant for?
Right. So, and that's a great lead-in question to the label of your podcast, Energy Perspectives. So that island is being reclaimed in order to provide ExxonMobil with space that they can use for as a port, as an offshore port. Now, particularly, they are using this for a surf base or a surf port. And surf for them means subsea, umbilicals, risers, and flow lines. It's basically all the materials that they use subsea to produce oil from the ground into the floating production, storage, and offloading vessels, or the FPSO vessels.
Why do you think it's significant that those services are being provided right here?
Because right now, currently, a small percentage of those services are done in country, which is marshaling that equipment, maybe and includes final assembly and then shipping off to the construction field. Currently, a lot of those services are done regionally within CARICOM and regionally within Latin America. So, and they're being done that way because we didn't have the infrastructure to support it. Now we do. So now we can bring more of that value add into Guyana.
Help me to understand the sort of effort that went into doing a project like this. I appreciate that you haven't gone into this project by yourself.
No.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. So the structure of the project works like this. So first of all, the local landholders, and we make no bones about it. We started as three of us. So Andron Alfonso, and the company he's representing is ZRN Investments. Myself, Nicholas Boyer, or Nicholas Deygoo, representing National Hardware, and we had Nazar Mohammed, or Uncle Shells, we all know him as, representing Hadi's World. And we acquired the lease holding. Now, with that lease holding, we went out and we solicited international contractors, and Yandenil was one of the best that we could work with. And they offered not just to be a contractor, but to be a partner in the project. So that's how, initially the structure of VEHSI, because you have NRG, which is the local lease holding, and then VEHSI. Now, unfortunately, Mr. Mohammed decided that it was something that he would like to step back from. So Andron, Alfonso, and myself acquired his ownership in NRG Holdings, and then we still have that partnership with Yandenil in Vreed-en-Hoop Shore Base Inc. So currently, as of today, Vreed-en-Hoop Shore Base Inc. is partly owned by Yandenil as well as NRG Holdings.
Do you think this model, collaborating, is something that is needed right now as we sort of build out local capacity for the growing oil and gas sector?
Hugely so, because the size of let's say the work that's being done, whether you measure it by manpower, whether you measure it by the top line or revenue of the projects that are being done, because Exxon has its overall project, which is to basically install and get into production an FPSO. But then under that overall project, you have many sub-projects. And the issue is that for our domestic economy, the sub-projects or the size of them are so large that we cannot, as individual companies or individuals, handle it by ourselves. Whether it's the financing, whether it's the manpower, whether it's the project management, whether it's particular skill sets or engineering or things that we may need to. So this is why the president, His Excellency Dr. Ali, has touted the consortium model of working together to try and get Guyanese companies to come together to create scale quickly. Because otherwise, if we were to organically achieve this scale, it would take us at least a decade. So we can skip that decade by working together.
There's a huge focus on working together, forging partnerships. But from your experience, can you tell us what are some lessons learned in finding partners, for example?
Well, one of the key things I think about finding partners is to make sure that when you get into the partnership, that everybody is aligned in their goals, as well as understanding what their expected contribution to the partnership is. And I think that has been one of having those two principal pieces of foundation have been what has allowed our partnership to flourish. It's myself and Andron, and even when Mr. Mohammed was part of the partnership, we all had a clear alignment of our goals. We had a clear understanding of what we wanted to achieve and what pieces we needed to add. Again, unfortunately, Mr. Mohammed decided to step back from the project and to relinquish or sell his shares to us. But we had an alignment when we were working together in terms of the principles and the goals we wanted to achieve. And Andron and I today still have that alignment and still have a clear vision in what we want for this base.
Yeah. Your project on its own is a huge undertaking for the local private sector. But I want to get your thoughts on private sector development generally. Do you think the private sector is developing in line with the local economy?
Yeah, well, if you ask the question that way, it's a little hard for the private sector not to develop in line with the local economy, because the private sector is one of the engines of growth of the local economy. But if I could paraphrase your question to kind of give a response, is that, is the private sector developing in line with what we see as the headline growth for the local economy, as well as the expectations of international companies who have come in and are asking for services to be provided to them? The answer is yes. When you go to all the meetings, when you listen to, whether it's ExxonMobil as operator of the Stabroek Block, of course it's a consortium, talk to you about how quickly the private sector developed from the time they outlined that they were going to go into production for Liza Destiny, the first FPSO, to now where they have just commissioned the Payara, or third FPSO. It's been radical pace of change in their point of view. I think we exceeded their expectations for how quickly we could develop partnerships. Now, of course, to do that, it has been a mix of us creating consortiums, a mix of us bringing in international both investors as well as experience and technology, as well as us bringing in regional investment experience and technology. So it's been us leveraging our market opportunity along with knowing and finding the right partners, region, international, and getting us into these consortiums or partnerships and joint ventures. And that has allowed us to really grow quickly.
I imagine that hasn't been an easy undertaking. What are some of the challenges the private sector has experienced and perhaps continues to experience?
Well, it's a paradigm shift, right? Because in the domestic economy, pre-oil and gas production, not fine, but production, a lot of our companies are, and some of them are still family-owned, family-operated, but family-owned, family-operated without the intention to really bring in outsiders into the boardroom or create these new joint ventures or partnerships. And so for us, having that mindset change, as well as being open to submitting ourselves to good corporate governance, because when you're in a family-owned structure, corporate governance is not necessarily the first thing you think about or put in. Usually, the reason you're in such a structure is because you can quickly make decisions and push those decisions through all layers of the organization rapidly. But when you get into partnership, you have to realize that it's not just about yourself and your decisions. You have to sit down and think about decisions that affect your partners as well. And so when you make these decisions, you have to both be transparent and be open to other points of view. And that's where governance and, formal structures like, if you're incorporating and having a board of directors become important, because they allow you to capture different policies, different ideas, different ways of working, different cultures, and find ways of distilling that down into an operational direction. And that has been a huge mindset shift. I would say what is pushing the winners versus the losers is the winners are able to quickly adapt and incorporate and inculcate these ideas in this way of working.
What do you think the local private sector needs to do more of now, not only in the oil and gas sector, but wider in the diversification strategy or getting opportunities in a diversified economy?
Well, what I've seen a lot of the local private sector doing is even in the sectors where it's not direct oil and gas related, you're seeing a lot of the spillover for better standardization. Again, I just mentioned previously, better governance within the company, more alignment in terms of vision, values, core mission of the companies. And you see people taking these steps, things that when I moved back here in 2010, these were things they preached to you in business school, and you see a lot of that naturally happening, and it's, to me, very heartening, because what it says is not even just about those of us providing services directly to oil and gas. it's saying those of us in general in the Guyanese economy all seek betterment and seek to improve our businesses and the way we offer our products and services. And that, I think, bodes well for our future.
Right. Tell us also your thoughts on the policies that are being implemented. Do you think policies are being implemented to support private sector growth?
Certainly. I mean, the private sector will always keep asking for more, right? So we will never relinquish that right to say, okay, well, great, government has done great so far, but we still want more. But outside of that, I'd say that governments firstly, their overarching policy, which is how they plan to spend the oil revenues, is been very, heartening to hear, because one of the key issues for a country like us finding such a resource like oil is how do you avoid natural resource curse, which is you find such an industry that everybody focuses just on this industry and forgets the other parts of your economy. And then this industry is extremely cyclical. And so you have very good years, but then you also have very bad years. And if all of us are doing the same thing in the economy, when the bad years come, it can get really bad. So the first thing is, it's good to see that the government's key mantra here is that we're going to take those funds and invest across the different sectors to increase and improve competitiveness in the other sectors. Because if we were to do this just based on what we earn or create in the domestic economy without having oil, it would have been hard. So examples of that are improvement in education, new hospitals, new roads. And for instance, those roads, particularly in the types that are what we call farm to market access roads, are hugely important, for instance, for the agricultural industry. So that is first and foremost a key and a big positive check. Further from there, we have things like government putting in the local content policy, right, which is more directly specific to the industry. So that local content policy allowed local businesses to really understand where they could participate within this industry, and it gave them comfort that the government was putting in some measures of protection for goods and services that they could provide. So that was another big positive step from policy, let's say. Further to that, I'd say that, key for us is to understand where do we go from here in terms of what is the future of the industry. So projects that we see, like the gas to energy, and then the policies around that are important because, again, one of the key downstream beneficiaries from the gas to energy is the manufacturing sector. So that, yes, we're talking about project gas to energy, but the policy is to increase competitiveness in the manufacturing sector and lower the cost of electricity, which also creates more disposable income in the average consumer, because if your electricity bill goes down, then you have more cash to spend that you didn't before when your electricity bill was higher. So these are some of the key policies I say that is positive we're seeing from government that relate to the industry, but also to the wider economy.
I'd like to understand a bit more how the private sector has been maybe contributing to development of these policies. And I'd like to perhaps zero in on the local content legislation, for example.
Right.
I know for a number of years, the private sector was heavily involved in pushing for that legislation. Then we got the law, and it carves out 40 areas specifically for Guyanese companies. But what sort of private sector, maybe advocacy, went into getting that?
Well, it was definitely a huge task by the private sector. And, you had bodies. So first of all, I have to give a big shout out to the Chamber of Commerce president before me, Deygoo-Boyer, Indar, who is now a minister. He's minister within the Ministry of Public Works. He started the fight at the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce for us to have a local content law. At that time, government, the then government, which was the APNU VEHSI government, was committing first to saying, and then eventually they would go on to commit to a policy under my tenure as president of the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce. And we kept pressing them. So when my successor, Timothy Tucker, came in as president, he was finally able to achieve government getting the new, at that point would have been the new PPP government, to commit to and agree to a local content law. And so that effort, spanned 3 Chamber of Commerce presidents, and we worked very hard to get that law into place. Because at the end of the day, we realized that because of our weaknesses at that time in the Guyanese business structure, without that protection, we would not have been able to participate in the industry.
Mm-hmm. In terms of your advocacy and lobbying, did that have a direct effect on the 40 areas carved out?
I think for us, I would say yes, but yes is a very simple answer. I mean, it was a negotiation, between us and government, and then also, government and industry, to try and figure out what sort of a local content law will work, how will it be flexible, recognizing what Guyanese capability exists, and then still be aspirational, but also not be so restrictive as to where it's stymieing the development of the industry. And you have some extra examples across the world where, because the laws are so strict and so restrictive, they've restricted the development of the industry, or they just don't function because the operators in those parts of the world just get waivers for everything that they need to. So therefore, the law then has no effect. So I think it was kind of a negotiated outcome between these 3 groupings. So local private sector, government in between, industry, and us coming to this kind of medium solution that, okay, this recognizes what you can do.
Right. On the Energy Perspectives podcast, we've heard a lot from government officials sort of outlining their plans for the next 10 years, or at least until up to 2030. But what would you say are some of the opportunities that the private sector sees emerging that it can capitalize more on in the years to come?
Well, it's an easy question, but it's a long answer. Because in Guyana, we have quite a bit to build up. So if you look at it from maybe urban areas, rural areas, and in between. So starting first with the urban areas, you see massive growth in things like hospitality. So, construction of new hotels. Still, when you look at government saying what they think based on their data, the total room demand will be, there will still be some space left for more hotels, for instance. Further to that, you have entertainment, recreation are 2 sectors that are growing quickly as well. So hospitality, entertainment, and follow on recreation, because you have more persons living in Guyana than were living here, say previously in the past 3 to 5 years. So these sectors are growing quickly. Then you have private education, because as you have expatriate workers moving here with their families, as well as Guyanese who want to upskill themselves, private education as well as private healthcare are also rapidly growing because you have more demands for those services. Then you follow on into things like transportation. So there are a number of services, because I want to jump out of just urban and then move across, let's say, to the rural areas. So in the rural areas, you also have still demand for housing, demands for goods and services, because the rural areas, their income is starting to grow. And so they are demanding certain things that they didn't have before, certain services they have before. So you have some amount of the creep of urbanization moving there.
Before we wrap up, any final thoughts you wanted to share with us?
I mean, for me, I'm just excited to be a part of a podcast, and I think for us, we from Vreed-en-Hoop Shore Base Inc, we're excited about our project. We are very close to handing over the first phase. So first phase of our project is handed over to ExxonMobil on December 16th. So it has been quite ambitious, because just yesterday, someone was reminding me that we started actual reclamation last November, somewhere around last November. So it has been about a year, and we essentially grew that island out of the water. So, sometimes the speed, it makes your head spin in terms of these projects. But this is what the oil industry has done, because it has created that demand to push us past our comfort levels and outside of our comfort zones.
A sign of things to come.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boyer, for joining us on this episode of the Energy Perspectives Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Guyana Energy Perspectives Podcast. Listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcast. Register today for the Guyana Energy Conference and Supply Chain Expo, coming to Georgetown, Guyana, February 19 to 22, 2024.